ITP120 Mod 7, last module, week 1. We have 2 weeks on this, 2 weeks on the project, and we're ready to roll. That's it. That's all we got. No final exam, no nothing. So once you get those 2 in, you're good. The project, after what we do today, you should be ready to work on the project as well. So as you get Mod 7 done, just head right out there for the project. You do have 2 weeks to do that, and so it shouldn't be too extreme, but we'll see as we go through. What I did today was I changed out there's an announcement out there, but I did change out the assignment for Mod 7. So if you got one before about 10 o'clock this morning, you might go get a fresh copy of this. The second problem just tended to look a little long, and I wanted to make sure you had enough time to work on the project itself. And so I replaced the second problem. The first one's still the same as we go through. So what's Mod 7 about? There's 2 topics in Mod 7, one of which we just really don't have time to cover. You'll get that in other classes if you take more Java, and that is exception handling. How do you actually work with these exceptions? And there are some that you must, and there's some that you should. Obviously, if you go into production, you should handle all the possible exceptions there are, because you don't want your program to blow up, obviously, as you are working with real data as you're going through. But there's just not time to do both. And so I'm just going to not do the exception handling. There is some, I do have some things out there for people that want to look at it right here. And so you're more than welcome to look at that as you go through. What we're looking at is filing, how to store something permanently. That's called persisting. I'm going to persist the data. I'm going to store it somewhere permanently. And Java's got some very, very rich classes for it. It's probably one of the more complicated APIs that exists is for handling files, because there's just so many choices. Do you want them to be text files? Do you want them to be random access? Do you want them to be byte files or bit files? Is it serializable? Is it linear? What type of file is it? And so what we're going to do in Mod 7 is just look at one type of all of that, just so you get used to how to persist data permanently. In reality, if you're in production, you're going to persist into a database anyhow, not into a flat file. But we're going to talk about reading and writing text files, actual files. You could open up Notepad and write the file and then read it into Java. Or you could write it out in Java and then you could open it up in Notepad and read it as you go through. And it is the way that we do a lot of things as we go through. Like I say, in reality, most of the stuff is done with databases as we're storing things, but flat files are also very useful. So you want to look at, it says DITAL chapters 11 and 15. I can't remember which is which. One of them's IO and the other one is exceptions. And we're just looking at the one that really does IO as we go through. Now, what we're going to find here is a whole new, rich set of classes. And I think in Mod 7, more than any other module we've done, there's going to be a lot more copying and pasting and less understanding. I hate to say that, but it's just that it's so big of a topic and we've got 2 weeks to cover it. So I'm going to make it straightforward for you. With a lot of copying and pasting. And so just to get the feel for it, and then obviously if you go to advanced classes, you're going to do a lot more of the writing yourself as you go through. This is a place you're going to see those stray imports just a lot. So make certain, please, before you turn your stuff in. I think I only had one person with stray imports in Mod 6. That was awesome. Before you turn your stuff in, go look at those little plus signs at the top of every class and make sure there isn't something up there that shouldn't be there, that you don't see the red X, but I do. And if I get them, it's not a big deal, but it's just something I have to change before I can actually run your programs as you go through and do that. All right, reading and writing text files. If we go and look at the code that I gave you, which is here, let me just tell you what's here. This is one from your book. I probably won't go over it in detail. They do it a little bit different in your book than what I'm going to do. Again, there's so many different ways to do this. You can even use the scanner class to read and write text files. I don't for 2 reasons. One, because the scanner class only came in JDK 8 and I was reading and writing text files for 5 years before that. I got used to doing it. the way I do it. The other reason is there's a scanner problem even reading text files, and I don't want to deal with that. And so if you want to use a scanner, you can. But I will show you probably what I think is a little bit more straightforward and a little bit more flexible to do that. This one, again, from your book, you don't necessarily need to look at. This guy right here, you need for our second problem that I now have, okay? Because remember, I replaced your second problem. And so we'll be using that. Probably I'll look at it next week when we see what we're actually doing. Exceptions, again, are here for anybody that's interested in this. I can put a movie out there for that, but we're not covering that specifically in our Mod 7 as we go through and do this. This has some start files for you. And we'll look at some of these. These are the way I used to do things. I did this like last spring, and people said, you know, it's reading and writing text files are still really confusing. And so I made this simple read write here, which I tweaked. And this is why I love these comments you guys put in, because last spring they told me again, reading and writing text files, I just need more direction on exactly what to do. And instead of doing this set here, okay, it's this set here that we're going to look at. All right, first thing we have to figure out. So I can open up a notepad. I can just open up regular old notepad here or whatever it is and get myself a file new, and I can write something in here. Let's say that they were class grades. I don't know what they are, okay? 87, we got somebody got 99, somebody got 56, somebody got 77, somebody got 100. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to read this file in and get the average of those values. All right. First thing that's critical is you must know the format of this file. Is it one per line? Okay, are they integers? Are they whole numbers? Is it one per line? Are there multiple ones on a line? Okay, that's a pretty simple file where I'm just going to read that in, read that in, read that in, read that in, somehow store it. I could accumulate it if I only need an average, or I could take this and read it into an array list so that I would have all the values so I could process them later as you go through. But what if instead of that I had something that looked like this? Okay, I can do that. Okay, these are grades. Let's say that only is 56. And I don't know why there's there's somehow they got it so that some lines have more and some don't. I'd like the average of all of these numbers. A little bit more complicated because there's multiple numbers on a line and they aren't the same amount of numbers. And so when you want to do, and these are integers. So when you want to do this, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to figure out what separates one number from another. Well, in this case, if you notice, it's a space, which is pretty cool. Okay, and so that's called your delimiter. That's a term you want to make sure you understand, delimiter. What separates one from another? And so in English, what I would do is I would start here and I would say, while there are more lines, read in the first line. So I read in that whole thing, and then break it apart every time you see a space. And then take each number and put it on an array list or something. While there are more lines, read it in, break it at the spaces, stick them on the array list. While there are more lines, while there are more lines, and then when I get to the bottom, I'm done, okay? Because we don't know how many lines there typically are in a file. And so indeed, in this case, it would be multiple values per line. And so that would be something I read in. Doesn't have to be a space as long as you know what it is. Okay, gets much more complicated if the file looks like this. Let's say that we have our bird class, and if you remember, birds had names and breeds. And so I've got Babs, who is a cockatoo. I've got Misha, who is also cockatoo. Okay, I've got Annie, who's a, oopsie, there's Annie down here. Annie, who is a macaw. Okay, et cetera, et cetera. And so realize what you'd have to do with this one, if we wanted to get this data read in, is you'd have to read this. You'd have to break it at the space or wherever it is. And then you'd have to take that name and that word and make a bird instance and add the bird to the array list. Okay, and then read the next one, and that's the first name, and that's the breed, and then make a new bird and add it to the array list or the array or whatever. Okay, so the format of your text file becomes critical. okay, how that's set up. And that's what makes this a little bit more difficult, is the fact that Java can't help you as far as just saying, geez, take this guy and turn it into a bird. And Java's going to say, I can't do that. I can read the whole thing in. I can break it at the space. I can read everything before the space. I can read everything after the space. I can make a bird object. I can add it to the array list, and I can do that over and over again. And so it's really the format of your file that's going to make a difference on how you actually do the concept. Okay, but the thing before we get that far is we have to figure out how to actually read from a file and how to write from a file as we go through. And so what I want to do is spend a reasonable amount of time looking at these guys. Because if you notice, this one is read, write. It does both reading and writing. And there's this is doubles, but it could be doubles or ints or strings or whatever. And so this is not the bird type I talked about. If we're talking about the bird type, that's kind of buried in here. And I kind of, some people were having real trouble with that last spring, so we're kind of down to making it a little bit easier here. But these guys here are if I have multiple values per line. And this is the one if you have one value per line. Okay, so that's like the first one I wrote. And that's like the last one, or the second one that I had where there are multiple values per line. Now, these are my text files. So this is the first one I'm going to look at. Notice these are doubles, okay? So it's sales or it's something of that sort. And compare that format. Notice in this case, my delimiter is a comma. And so whoever wrote the file has to tell you what the delimiter is. Now, these could be actually come out of Excel spreadsheets. And for anybody that's done some Excel, the data could come out of Excel and you can export it as a CSV file, csv.csv. If you haven't seen that ending before, comma separated values. So things coming out of Excel very commonly, you can pick what the delimiter is, but by default, a lot of times it'll come out looking like this. Okay, where these were different columns in your Excel spreadsheet. All right, we're compared to this where there's only one value per line. All right, so what I'd like to do is I'd like to get those two files read in. All right, first problem I have is where are those files? Okay, and the one thing I don't like about what the book does is the book, in most cases, although they show you the other way to do it too, but they hard code in the location of the file. You are not allowed to do that. Okay, I have people run mod 7, okay, and they will hard code, go find the file at c:/Bob's computer/ my files / ITP120 / whatever. Well, I don't have Bob's computer, okay? And so the first thing we want to do when we are picking a file is you must for me, always have one of these. These are called a dialog box. And we're going to have to figure out how to make that dialog box. And you know that when you either save as or open, okay, so we're talking about saving and reading, there's two parts to this. There's this part, which is the path, right there it is, and then there's the actual file name. And so we're going to have to put one of these dudes up there and let people pick where they're reading their file from and where they're writing their file to. I do not want these hard-coded in there because they're not going to be in the same location on my computer as they are on your computer. Okay, so what I'm going to do so that we can run these, I'm going to take these two files. Okay, I just put them in there so we'd have some data we could use. I'm going to copy them and I'm going to stick them on my desktop. That's where I'm going to stick mine. All right, but we're going to go look for them anyhow. They could be anywhere and I can go find them when I do that. All right. Excuse me. All right, so let's look at the one per line. This is the one that's going to go out and read this as you go through. It doesn't have a menu because I tried to make it as simple as possible. The program you're going to use, the second one, I think is going to be menu driven. We've done menus before. You guys are getting used to menus. It shouldn't be a problem as you go through. And so I want to look at this. Okay, there's a lot of new classes here, and I'm going to talk you through them. Okay, but also there's going to be a lot of ability to copy and paste as you go through. Now, again, this isn't menu driven. So notice the main menu very simply. I'm going to read in those files. Okay, so I'm going to read in these guys here. And my only goal is to stick them into an array list in memory. And I think I get an average maybe. Okay, but notice I'm going to read an array list of doubles. Okay. And notice here, it's going to call this method input data, which is going to input the data, and then output data values is just going to output it. System.exit 0, if I haven't showed you that before, it's something you want to make sure you put in your mod 7 as your last line of code in main, because that makes sure that the program ends. And I will talk to you about why the program might not end as we go through. All right, so what do I use to read data, okay, from a file? I want to be able to read that data from a file, and then we'll figure out how to write it back as we go through. There's, like I say, if you look at all this is buried, there's two places. It's in java.io, is the package where there's a lot of the IO stuff. And there's a java.nio, which just came in JDK 9 or something. I think that's a bad name because it's called new IO, but 20 years from now, it's not going to be new, but that's okay. And so two packages, java.io, java.nio. We're going to use most of the stuff from java.io. Okay, and so notice when you want to bring a lot of stuff in from a package, you can just say .asterisk. And so you don't have to name all the things that are in there. And again, don't worry about putting all these in. Eclipse put them in for me, just like we do with the scanner, and we hover over it and it imports what we need to import as we go through and do that. All right. So what I want to do is I want to be able to reopen a file to read. And I also want to be able to open a file to write. Okay, so those are my two goals. Now, I've put these, unlike this other example here, because that's why they didn't like these, I put these in special methods, okay? So whenever you have a problem from me that you need to read from a text file, you just copy and paste that guy right into your program, okay? If you need to write, okay, to a file, okay, you copy that one in there, okay, as you go through, and that'll help you a lot as you go through. All right, so let's look at this method here, and I'm going to talk you through it. But again, you're just going to copy and paste this method, and it's going to return you a buffered reader. What's a buffered reader? A buffered reader, known as capital B, capital R, is a Java class used to read from a text file, okay? It's used to read from a text file. And so this is going to return a buffered reader for me that I can then use to read from the file, okay? Now, also, as I say, I want that dialog box. So here's a lot of new stuff for you. What's a frame? It's one of Java's GUI widgets, okay? We're not doing GUI in here. We don't have time to do GUI. We barely had time to do everything we did. But a GUI widget is just something like a text box or a radio button or something else. A frame is this guy here. It's that whole big frame here, okay, when you do that. File dialog, again, capital F, capital D, must be a Java class, and it is. And a file dialog is just, am I reading or writing? I'm reading. Is just one of these, okay? It's got, again, two things. It's got a path and it's got a file name. And so file dialog, FO box equals new file dialog. Looks like I'm just calling the constructor. Never seen it before. I have, you guys haven't, maybe. Okay, but I'm calling the constructor on the file dialog. Now, whenever you want to write a constructor, your question is, okay, what arguments do I have to pass? The answer is 3. Okay, for a file dialog. It's where do you want it to go, and it always goes in that frame. What string do you want it to say up here? You know how when you open dialog box, it always says here, opening this file or closing this file. And then the third one is a Java constant. I know that because it's all capitals in the file dialog class. And your choices are file dialog.load or file dialog.save. This is if you want to read. That's if you want to write. Okay. Now, one of the things when we run this, you'll see that's a little quirky, is that file dialog will open, but it opens behind the Eclipse screen sometimes. And so people say, oh, my program didn't work. And the answer is it's there. It's just behind the Eclipse screen. And so just to make sure people know that, I have a system.println. The dialog might appear behind Eclipse. Choose wherever you'd like to read from. And then you set visible to true. That says, I want to physically see that file dialog box on my screen. I'll run this in a minute and you can see that as you go through. All right, now, it's going to sit there and wait until you, and that's one thing about GUIs, is they wait for people to, they're event driven, they're called event driven. They're going to sit there and wait until you type something, until you hit the save button or you hit the open button or whatever it might be when you do that. Once you do that, there are two parts. There is the directory and there's the name of the file, okay? And those are methods on this file dialog box, file dialog box.get file, fo box.get directory. If I put those together, I now have an absolute path. But I did not type it in as a Java string. I let the user pick it. And that's what's critical about that, is to make certain that we understand the user's the one that's going to have to pick this as we go through and do that. And what I'm going to do, so we can see this when we run it, is I'm going to say sysout, tab, sysout, control space, there we go. Come on, sysout, you can do it, there you go. And it's going to say location, just so you can see this. And then I'm going to take, dir path plus fo name. And you'll see that it just looks like a regular path. Okay, but I got to pick it from a dialog box instead of having to do it. All right, so what do I do with that? I create a file, a Java file. That is actually a file on the computer now. So I'm opening it up to read. So it took that file, it went to that location, looked for a file, and it opened it up to read it. For people that have programmed another language, you do not in Java have to specifically call an open method. In some languages, you have to call an open method. Here, by just calling the file, it's open. Okay, if that doesn't exist, which it should because you pointed to it, it's just going to say it doesn't exist. And again, that line of code you might not have seen before says just kill the program right there. That's a way to kill the program. So the only way I get here is if that location did occur. Okay, what's a buffered reader? A buffered reader is the thing that is used for reading. There's a number of ways to do it, but it's the thing I use for reading from text files. Try catch, a really new thing for you, which I will go over next week for sure. But this is that exception handling. I told you we weren't going to cover exception handling. Well, we have to write some, because there's two types of exceptions in Java. There are checked exceptions and unchecked. Unchecked are ones that you can program for if you're programming defensively. Checked exceptions are one Java says they're so egregious if you violate them that you must write code for them. And reading and writing from a file is a checked exception, so I had to write this. But again, you're just going to copy this and paste it. But what this is going to do is it's going to create that buffered reader from that file at that location. Okay? And it's going to return it. And so all this does, this method, which you're going to copy and paste into yours, is it's going to put up a dialog box, say, where do you want to read the file from? You pick it, okay, and then hit open, and then this buffered reader gets returned so that you can use it in the rest of your program. And that's what you're going to read from. Similarly, if I want to write, okay, to a file, it's a print writer that does the writing of text to a file. Okay, again, text. So again, I got my frame, I got my file dialog, but this time I'm going to do .save because I want to save the file instead of, I want to save the data instead of read the data back. Okay, same thing, it might appear behind, let the user know, set visible to true, get the file, get the directory, create a file, create a print writer. Again, the try catch has to be there, and it returns that print writer. So again, as all those methods do is do all the stuff in the background to get a print writer or a buffered reader. Buffered reader is for reading text files. A print writer is for writing to text files. Okay? So the idea is if we can get that far, and you can kind of understand that, the rest of it is just Java that we've learned, essentially. Okay, because we've been reading from the keyboard. In this case, all we're doing is reading from a file instead of reading from a keyboard. And so if you notice the input data method here, shouldn't be anything that's much different except for those try catches, is if you notice here, I create an array list, okay? I get my buffered reader. How do I get my buffered reader? I get it by opening that file for reading, okay? And then I read a line at a time when I actually do that. So it's going to read a line as we go through. The other thing that's a little bit different for this is when I read, here's my values. When I read these values from a file, these are text. Us humans are smarter than computers. We realize that that's a double. That looks like a double. Java says, nah, text file. Okay, it's a text. Okay, I have no idea if that's a number. I have no idea I can do math on that. That is just text. So if you read from a text file, you've got to then, once you read this, you've got to tell Java, hey, Java, that really was, okay, a number. How do I do that? Well, your book does that a lot. And so you may have seen that code before, and that is this right here. So I read in the first line. If it does not equal null, notice this while loop. Why do I have a while loop? Because I don't know how many lines there are. So I read in a line. If the line does not equal null, I do something. And then I read in another line and do something. And I read in another line and I do something until line equals null. That means I'm at the end of the file. And then I need to close the file and I'm done. So notice I read in a line. I just read in the first one. If it's not null, I take that line, I turn it into a double, store it in a variable that's a double, and then add it to my array list. There's my array list. All right. And then what I do is I read the next line in. I try to read in the next line. If the line does not equal null, okay, I turn it into a double, put it on my array list. Try to read in the next line. If the line does not equal null, turn it into a double, add it to the array list, etc., etc. And this while loop is going to end when I get to the end of the file, because at the end of a text file, there's a little marker that Java reads as null when you actually do that. Okay. Now, this stuff has to be here, and this again we're going to go over next week. This has to do with these checked exceptions I talked about, and that's what makes, I think, Mod 7 really hard for some people, is because it's hard to see the forest for the trees. But I'm going to show you what you're going to change in here, and there's not much you change in here no matter what you're doing, if you're reading from a text file or writing to a text file when you do that as you go through. So we'll see that. But the important part that this thing's doing is making sure the file gets closed. File has to get closed at the end. It puts a little marker at the end that's the end of file marker, or you can't read it the next time around. And then notice the last thing this does is it returns that array list that I read in as I went through and did that. All right. And so what that's going to do, this method is going to input my data. It's going to read it in from the file, and it's going to return this array list of doubles that I can now do whatever processing I want. From that point on out, it's mods 1 through 6, mod 1 through 5, really, as we go through and do that. So notice what the output data does. This sends it back out to the print writer. Okay, and is all I'm doing here is I'm going through and I'm looping this thing, okay, through my array list, and I'm printing this to a file. Now, I want you to look very carefully at line 120. If this said system.out.println, the output would go to the console. That's what we've been doing all semester. This says out.println. There's no system in front of this. Well, who's out? Well, out is that print writer that prints out to a file. And so this thing will print it back to a file when you actually do that. Okay. And so output data. And again, I'll show you which parts of these you want. So that's going to output the data out. And there we go. So here we go. Let's run this and you can see it run, and then it might make a little bit more sense. This one shows in front, and what happens is if you had typed anything in here, this guy would actually be back behind Eclipse. Okay, when you do that. Notice if I click here, it looks like it disappeared. And it didn't really disappear, it's that it goes behind Eclipse. So what you gotta do is go find it. Here it is. And notice right there is that deal. Pick location for reading your file. All right, and so I'm going to go to the desktop because you remember I put these out in the desktop. I want the one per line. There it is, got text. And then that one says, where do you want to write the file back to? Okay, and I will send it back to the desktop and I'll call it my output.txt. Usually txt on the end for text files. Okay, it really doesn't matter, but you can do that. And that program ran and you're going, well, that's not impressive when you do that. But right there it is. And that's the file I just wrote. Now, this is no biggie because I just read in some data and printed it out. But I was trying to make it as simple as possible for the first one so we could actually see it happen. Okay, so let's do this. So we read in the one desktop. That's the one we read in, okay? And that's the one we printed out. So let's try that again, but let's watch it run through the debugger because it'll make a whole lot more sense when we do that. Here we go. Got it. All right, so I'm going to take this guy. Oh, and I'll put a breakpoint. Let me put a breakpoint way up here. Now, let me put it right. Open read. Put it there. All right. So I'm going to take this guy and I'm going to debug as a Java application. You can watch this thing happen. All right. So we're over here into here. All right. So it's going to create me a frame, which you're not going to see right now, but we'll get there eventually. Okay. So F6. It's going to create me a file dialog box. I don't see these yet. There's the printing that says the file dialog will appear behind Eclipse. Choose where it is. It's going to set visible to true. Okay, and notice again, I'm beating on F6 and it's blue because what it wants to do is it's waiting for you. That means that file dialog box is waiting for me. Gotta go find it. Where are you? You gotta be hiding way back here. Here we go. Pick location for reading your file. Okay, I'm on the desktop. It's gotta be sales data one per line. There we go. All right, go get the file name. Go get the directory. Notice here's that path, and that's why you can't hard code it in. Notice my desktop is absolute path. That's called the absolute path. Is C:users wolf desktop sales data one per line .text. Well, obviously, if you just put this in as a Java string, or I do, you're not going to be able to read my file because you don't have a wolf desktop. And that's why we need these file dialog boxes to do that. All right, so we're down here on line 32, F6. If in file exists, buffered reader, it's going to return me a buffered reader. Notice up here, I got a nice buffered reader called in, which is wonderful. F6. It's going to open it to read. Okay, so watch the top right. Now, let's remember that file. That file had one per line as we went through. And so watch up in the top right. If I do an F6, notice it read in the first piece of data. It's now read in that first line. But notice it's in double quotes. And that's because it's coming from a text file, so it's a string. While line does not equal null. Well, it doesn't equal null. All right, it's the string 24987.62. So notice what happens on line 90. F6, F6. Notice how that does not have quotes, that does. Double dot parse double says pass me in a string and I'll turn it into a double. I'm now going to add that to my sales array list. Here's my sales array list I made before. Notice there's nothing in it right now. F6, I now have that value sitting in the first location of the sales array list. Read in the next line, F6. Looks like that. Make it into a real double, F6. Add it to the array list, F6. We can watch these things going on up there. If you notice on the top right, my array list is picking up the values, okay? F6. Get the next one, add it to the array list. Gotta keep looking, it's gonna be coming here soon. Get the next one, F6, add it to the array list. Get the next one. Notice that array list is getting them. It's a good thing there aren't too many values up there. Keep adding them. And the debugger will help you a lot in Mod 7. F6. Okay, now, everybody look at the top right. I hit the last value in that file, and I said what, and then I tried to read in the next line, and line is now null. It's actually null if there were it's yellow. And so what's going to happen is, well, line doesn't equal null. Well, it equals null. So it's going to drop out of this while loop. Okay, F6, if I can find F6, there's F6. There it goes, closes the file, returns the sales, and now I've got the array list into main, okay, of all those values that I read from that file, so that now I can use them for whatever. And I could pass them into a method where I could then get the average, high value, low value, whatever it is. But the difference here is the data is coming from a file at that location. All right, now what I'm going to do is put it back out to a different file. So I'm going to do an F5 so I can watch this happen. I'm going to create a print writer. And again, the dialog box is behind. Where do you want this thing to be? And I'm going to put it back in my output, whatever I called it, output, my output.txt. And notice, even just like everything else, it says, oh, you sure you want to overwrite that? And I'll say, yeah, I do want to overwrite that. Life is good, okay? And so it's going to loop through this array here, array list, just like any array list we had, except notice it's sending it out to the print writer, out.printWrite. If I had system.out.println, I'd go to the console. But these are going to go to that file one by one. You can't open the file while it's going out there, but I'll show you it got there when you did that. Notice up here, we're at number 1, we're at the second number went in, the third number went in, the fourth number went in, fifth number went in, the sixth one, and then we are done. The program is over. System.exit 0, and we're good. And the data is sitting out there in the other file that I wrote it out to. Very fast. But we'll talk about which parts of that you need for yours. Any questions on that right now? Anybody got any questions right now? All right. What if I have more than one per line? Okay. What if I have more than one per line? Because we need that for our first problem we're going to be doing together, which is pretty similar. Well, everything's going to be the same, except when I get down to the point of reading in the file. So I want you to look at this carefully. And I borrowed this from another program, and we don't need these averages because I didn't do an average for you. So I'm going to get those out of there just so it'll clean it up. Okay. But here's the deal here. The biggest problem here is that when I look at this, I've got to, and here's what I'll do in English. I'm going to read in this line. I'm going to break it at the comma. I'm going to stick that on the array list. I'm going to stick that in the array list. I'm going to read in the next line. Nothing to break it at. Stick that on the array list. Read in the next line. Break it at the comma. Put that one on the array list. That one on the array list. Read in the next line. Break it at the comma. Got to put 3 of them on the array list. So it's got to process it that way. And what it sounds like is a for loop inside of a for loop. Okay, the outside for loop is, a while loop inside of a while loop. I'm sorry. The outside while loop is while there are more lines. And the inside while loop is while there are more values on a given line. We need to do something, okay? And so what code is the same, okay? What code is different? This code has not changed at all. It never will, okay? You can just copy and paste that method right into yours if you need to read. You can just copy and paste this method into yours if you need to write. All right. This one, most of it you can copy in, and I'll tell you what changed here and why it changed. First thing you're going to change is in case you read an array list of something else besides doubles, because they could be strings in there, or they could be ints in there. And the same thing here, you'd have to change it to the right data type. Okay, the other thing that's going to change is this right in here. Notice this time I compare this one to the other one when we get offline, but I have a while loop inside of a while loop. This one is the while loop I had before. Okay, and that's while there's more lines, read in the next line, read in the next line, read in the next line, read in the next line. Okay, and so the code, and I probably should have put a note in here for you from here, and you might just watch this and then you guys can fix that yourself when you do that. To here is what changes according to the application. There you go. Okay, that in there. Because if I just essentially, and let's go back and look at the other one, that's between while and the try. Okay, so if I go back to the other one, between the while and the try, is all I had to do was read in that line, parse it to a double, add it to the array list. Read in the next line, parse it to a double, add it to the array list. And that's all that is between the while and the try in here. Okay, and that's what you change based on the application. That's what it says right there. Okay, in the original file. So when I come out here, this is what I have to change from here to here. Because notice what I'm doing here. This is a new class for you. And I like the string tokenizer. Some people you can use the string split method if you want to. I just like the string tokenizer. What the string tokenizer is a class that says, I want you to break this string at that delimiter. I want you to break this string at that delimiter. And so the string tokenizer is what's going to take and chop this up into 3 pieces. Okay, now it's going to chop this line into 3 pieces according to the delimiter. And the delimiter is whatever I asked for. What is the delimiter here? And you told me that you'd put a comma in for this application. Or you could have just here done this. Just put a comma right there. Okay, if you always want your line, split at a comma, just put a comma in there. Or if you want it split at a space, just put a space in there. Or you can ask the user and then use the variable that they filled in as their delimiter when you do that. All right. Next thing I need to do is I need to take this guy. I need to break it with that string tokenizer into 3 pieces. And then while there are more pieces, I need to put that one on the array list and then put that one on the array list and then put that one on the array list. How do I do that? Another while loop. While st.has more tokens, go parse the next one, add it to the array list. Are there more pieces? Think of a token as one of those pieces when I break it up at the comma. Okay, they call those tokens, or the pieces when you break up the commas. Okay, and so go get the next one, turn it into a double, add it to the array list. Go get the next one, turn it into a double, add it to the array list. Get the next one, turn it to a double, add it to the array list. When there aren't any more left, read the next line. If the line isn't null, create the tokenizer. While there's more pieces, read in the next one, convert it to a double, add it to the array list over and over and over again. The only other thing here is this trim at the end, but you guys know what that is because you guys are string experts. We did all that string stuff. The trim just essentially trims off spaces because it turns out that if this looked like this, it'd blow up because it can't turn that into a double because there's that space in front and it wouldn't know what to do with it. So a trim is just a method in the string class that says get rid of any leading or trailing spaces as you go through and do that. All right, so when you do that, that's just what that trim is doing for you. Otherwise, you're just going to copy all this stuff in there when you do that, and then the output data is going to be whatever you think you want to output as you go through, okay, whatever it might be. And then you could have other methods like getting the average or getting the high value or getting the low value. But the new thing, that's not new. The only new thing here is how to read it in from a file. So if we go look at the first problem you're going to work, okay, and we'll work on more of this. And I can get more movies out there if you need it, let me know. There's only two problems in this movie, which is, in this module, which is fine. Okay, and here's the first one. And you should be able to do the first one according to what we've just done. Now, notice, a little bit different. These are integers instead of doubles, and they're separated by spaces, but otherwise, same thing as you go through. You're provided with a text file that has a list of ratings, values between 1 and 10. Now, I can use whatever text file I want to grade your stuff. And so you can't assume that there's 6 lines. There could be 10 lines. There could be 4 lines. There could be any number of items per line. But I will tell you the values are between 1 and 10. Multiple values on a line, multiple lines. For your testing, just create one with numbers of your choice. You can test this one to see if this works and then try a different file. But again, if you don't know how to do that, just take this guy and copy it and go out to Notepad or Notepad++ or whatever you got. Okay, do File, New, paste this in here, and then File, Save As. Okay, and wherever you want to put it, just make sure you got it. You don't have to give it to me. I'm going to call it ratings.txt, rating.txt, and it's going to be on my desktop. So now I can use that file, okay, to test my program when I run it as we go through. All right, then what does it say? Oh, okay, cool. So getting it read in is going to be the most important part. Your program should return the distribution and the average. Now, the distribution and the average has nothing to do with Mod 7, my friends. Okay, once we get it read in, we're good to go. We should be able to do a distribution and an average. I did not give you a UML diagram. I'm hoping by the time we hit Mod 7, you know what it means to break things up into methods. So I don't want to see one big main method. I need to have a method that does, the distribution, maybe another method that does the average. See if you can impress me by making sure we can break these up into pieces like that. But the thing that's new for Mod 7 is getting this to read in. So if I was going to start this, distribution.java, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to come over here, and I'm probably going to totally mess up my code, but I don't care. Okay, and I'm going to come out here, and I'm going to create a package, and it's called dwolf mod 7. There we go. And I'm going to create a Java class, and it's going to be called distribution, and it has to run. So I have to put public static void main. That's a good thing. All right, there it is. I'll get rid of you. All right, now, when I go back and I think about this, so I'm only reading on this one. I don't have to write. So for this program, I just need to read in that file and then get this distribution average. Okay, that's cool. So I only need to read. Oh, that's pretty good. I can live with that. So and it looks like there's multiple values on a line. So I want to go get this guy. All right, and I want to go get the open read. I want to go get this method. Come here, method. There we go. Make sure you get all the way to the end of the method. That would be nice. And when you paste that in, make certain you paste it outside of main. You cannot put a method inside of a method. Okay. And then let's see, what else do I need over here? One line, multiple line per line. That's cool. That reads it. That's for writing. I don't care about writing it. And I'm going to get my input data. So I'm going to make sure I get this whole thing. Don't get more than you need. And I'm going to take and I'm going to copy that guy. Again, do not get it messed up. Make sure you are outside of the first method, inside of the last brace. And you can tell you pasted it right, because if you pasted it right, you should be seeing your methods here. Okay, when you actually do that. All right. So I've got those two methods, which is pretty cool. Now, if I come over here, notice what it did here, and we don't need a menu for this one. The second one we'll look at. Okay, I'm going to do something similar to this here, except I'll take it and I'll borrow it, but that's not exactly what I want. What I want here is I want an array list of ints, because those look like ints, they're ratings. Integer, sorry. There we go. Okay, input data. Now, notice what it says. Cannot convert from doubles to integers. Right, well, that's true, because this guy here is using doubles, and I'm using integers. Integer, there we go. And so I'm using an integer here, so that's cool. There we go. All right, cool. Gotta fix this one too, don't I? All right, yeah, got it. All right, now that's cool. And so all I'm gonna do is return all the array lists that we actually can do that. And the only thing I need to change here, I'm gonna ask what the delimiter is. Okay, and it's going to read it in, and 1 month doesn't make any sense. I mean, I could change the name of this. I don't need this. Okay, you gotta get used to what you need, what you don't do. I'm just gonna call it value. Value is cool. I can live with value. And it's not 1 month's value, it's one rating. Okay, so I'll even change my comment here. All right, so then what I want to do here is, this is called rating. Okay, and I'm going to add to my sales list a rating. Oopsie, not a freighting, it's a rating. But it's not a double, it's an integer. So it's an integer dot parse int. Okay, when you actually do that, so rating, what did I call it up there? I must not have called it rating. What did I call it? Value. Sorry, I called it value. We probably should call it value, shouldn't we? There we go. What's your problem? Dot add. The method add integer, the type integer, not applicable for the argument double. I still got a double somewhere. Sales.add. Oh, array list. And I, you know, this isn't sales, this is ratings, so I'll change this to ratings. When I do that, okay, and then I'm going to add this back to the ratings. Dot add. And it's saying the add integer of the type array list integer is not applicable for the argument double. Why do I still have a double? Just got to clean this stuff up. Oh, this is going to return, what did I say? Return value. Value is the individual. What I name the array list? Ratings. There we go. I'm going to return ratings. There you go. You happy now? Almost. Why do you still think that value is it? Oh, it's a double. That's why it shouldn't be a double. Where'd value go? Oh, here we go. Int. I'm reading integers. All right. Notice Java's wonderful. It takes track of that. All right. Cool. Now if I have that, Mod 7 is done. Because this just gave me an array list. So I could do this, and I'll do this much, and then you guys can do the rest. I'm not giving you this. You just got to kind of watch this. I did that. We do that. Void print. And we can all print array lists in our sleep. I know we can. AL. I'll call it AL, right? And so we're going to see if this thing got read in. And you can actually, for int, you can actually use a debugger and watch it. It might help. I is less than AL.size. I plus plus. Sys out. AL.get I, like we've been doing with array lists forever. Okay, so once I get this thing, then what I should be able to do is call print values. And if I do, then I know it got read in. It's now in memory, and then I know what to do with this thing. So I'm going to run this as a Java application. It's a good thing I wrote that file out there, huh? Okay, where is it? And I think I wrote it, I copied it, and I put it out here, and I call it ratings, didn't I? There you go. Where's a delimiter? What was a delimiter? Was it a space? Space. There you go. Look at the values got into memory. Awesome. Okay, so it read it in from the file, got those values into my array list here. And now is all you've got to do is figure out, once you get that, how to get this distribution, how to get an average. Well, you guys know how to get an average. You guys know how to get an average. Okay, and I want you to think about that. And if you put something out, somebody puts it out in the piazza, I still don't have a clue on how to get the distribution. I can give you some clues, some hints. Okay, I'm not going to tell you exactly, but notice as all this is, it just tells you how many ones occurred, how many twos occurred, kind of like a histogram or a distribution, how many threes occurred. So what it did was it went through the array list and counted how many ones, twos, threes, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8s, and 9s. Okay, as you did that, and then got an average, and 10s, I guess, so it's 1 to 10 when you do that. But once you do what I just did, okay, there is nothing left as far as Mod 7. All the Mod 7 learning is done. Okay, the rest of this is earlier on stuff on how to get averages. And again, maybe don't cram it all in here. It'd be really nice if I had a method called distribution and a method called average that actually calculates the average. So it'd be great for you to add 2 more methods to what I have, but I didn't write a UML diagram, so I didn't require it to have certain names or anything else, but I would certainly do that. Any questions on how that was done? I know it's kind of like a black hat or whatever they call it, you know, black magic, I guess. But it's because we just don't have time to do reading and writing much as we go through. All right, let's start looking at the second one, and it needs some writing as well to go through, and it's more complicated. It's going to take you a lot longer. This one, after what I've written here, if you can think about how to do the distribution, this problem should really, the first one should not take you long. Okay, I did change. Is this the right one? This better not be the right one. Where'd I get this? I don't know where I got this, but let's go make sure that I had a problem. If you see a problem called hotel, you got the wrong one. Because hotel is going to take you a lot longer. So let me go make sure that I did post the right one out here, because I've been doing lots of stuff today and I don't remember what I did. So if I go out and get a current value of the module instructions, and I open it with Word, the second problem is going to be more fun anyhow. Well, hotel charges, that's fun. But
so hotel is wrong.
Correct. I put a new one out there today that's going to be, it really is easier. You don't want to do the hotel one. And this one's actually more interesting too. It's called file encryption. Okay, we're going to encrypt a file and we're going to decrypt a file. Now, first off, notice I put weird Roman numerals here for my menu. Okay, and you can just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 when you actually do that. Okay, and that's menu items. Now, how do you write a menu? We did that in insurance, so you can just go borrow the one from insurance and do the exactly same thing we did in insurance. So go borrow code for the insurance. But here's the idea, is I want to be able to encrypt a file. Now, believe me, the encryption scheme we're going to use is so low level that you would never get hired doing it, but that's okay. Okay, when you actually do it. We're going to do it pretty easy as far as the encrypting part of it. And then you could use a really complex algorithm if you wanted to do more security as you go through. But as long as let's understand what you're going to do in your menu items, and then we'll start looking at how to encrypt in the few minutes we have left. Read in a file. Okay, what kind of a file is it? It is a text file. Okay, and the cool thing about it is this program would work whether it was a text. So again, what I would do if I were you when I was testing this is I would go out here and I would write me a new file that says, I love Java. Java loves me. I am having a lot of fun. Okay, there you go. So there's my file that I want. Okay, a very simple little file out here. Just multiple words on a line, multiple lines, doesn't matter how many there are. Okay, and so I'll call it file, and I'm going to save as, again, a text file somewhere. I will call it, I don't know, quote.txt. I don't care. Because remember, your user is going to go search for it anyhow, and I can use whatever I want. Believe it or not, when your program runs, I could actually use the entire text file for War and Peace. And I do have the text file for War and Peace because I use it in my second semester Java class. But you could encrypt the entire War and Peace book. How's that for a deal? Okay, that's a great novel when you actually do that. So that's the idea, is to read in a file. Okay, print the file to the council. That is for debugging purposes only. That's to make certain that menu item 1 works. And again, you might want to use Roman numerals instead. I then want to encrypt the file. We'll talk about what we're going to do about encrypting it and writing it to the council. Then step 4 is to take that encrypted file and write it out to a text file. So now we need both the reads and the writes as we go through. And before we leave today, I'll tell you whether you need, which version you need, whether it's 1 per line or multiple per lines as we go through. Clear the data in memory, which is probably a array list. And then read in the encrypted file, decrypt it, and write the decrypted file back off the console. And when you get done, menu items 2 and 8 should be the same. Because you read in the file, you printed it out, you encrypted it, you decrypted it, means it better come back looking like it did originally. Okay? Any questions on what you're doing, not how to do it, but what you're doing? Okay, reading in a file. So I would start by just getting that menu item, and then I would come out here and I would borrow code. Now, do I need the one that's multiple per line, or do I need the one that is a single per line? You might think that this is multiple per line, but when I'm encrypting, here's the encryption scheme I'm going to use. Okay, I'm going to move everything over by 1 letter. So capital I is going to turn into a capital J. A space is going to turn into whatever ASCII code or Unicode is next to a space, which I think is an exclamation point if I remember. L's are turning into M's, O's are turning into P's, V's are turning into W's, E's are turning into F's. Everybody understand what I'm saying? And so all we're doing is moving everything over by 1 letter as you're going through and doing things. And so when I decrypt it, I'm going to move it back by 1 letter. All right, so if that's the idea of what we're going to do, and we'll keep working on this next week, so don't get too worried about it, you'll be fine, is I want to read in this whole thing as a string, and then I want to go through it character by character. I know how to go through it character by character because I've done that before. I did that in the quote program we had, is I want to go through it character by character and move it over 1. So the I turns into the J and the space turns into the exclamation point or whatever. So it looks like to me what I need is I need 1 per line. All right, cool. I need 1 per line. So if I start this, it's going to be called, I think, encrypt decrypt, I think. Encrypt decrypt, there we go. Is I would come out here and I'm going to do a class and it's going to be called encrypt, CRYPT, DCRYPT, and it's going to run. All right, and I'm going to come down here that says 1 per line, and I am going to borrow open read, open write. I'm going to borrow all of this. So I actually borrowed everything except for main. All right, again, I'm going to come out here and make sure, I know somebody's going to mess this up. You're outside of main when you paste that in there. Make sure you're outside of main when you paste it in there. Okay, and notice it actually pastes in all of these imports, which I really don't care about. Okay, so make sure for the distribution, you're using the multiple per line, and for the encrypt decrypt, you're using the 1 per line. All right, now what am I going to do for people that are going to get that far ahead? That's cool. Okay, and again, you don't have to do it my way. You can do it differently, but I'm giving you some good ideas. In this case, I am going to have an array list of strings. Okay, I'm going to call it lines equals new array list of string. Okay, that's cool. I don't need a number pharmacy. This, I don't need the number currency. You can leave it in. It doesn't matter. Okay, and this is going to be string. One line. Everything else stays the same. Blah, 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 blah. I don't have to parse it. Okay, because it is already a string coming out of the text file, because that's text file. So this is just going to be lines.add. And what am I adding?
One line.
One line. Thank you very good. Very much. I appreciate that. There you go. All right. And then I've got to return lines. There you go. It's in. Got it read in. Now I just have to figure out how to decrypt it. And that's another question. And what's your problem? Lines.add one line. Oh, no, actually, I'm going to lines.add line. Because it's line I read in right there. So I guess I don't even need that variable called one line. Not used. There you go. Cool. All right, it's read in. That's cool. Now I could print it out and make sure it's there. Okay, so again, I'll write a main method. This returns an array list of strings. I would get that, and then I'm going to process it from there. And again, we'll talk about how to process it from there next week. I just want to get you far enough ahead. All right, how do I then encrypt it and decrypt it? Okay, and let's just keep on for another 5 minutes or 10 minutes so I can help people with that part of it. I have a great, since this is mod 7, I'm trying to help you as much as I can. Here we go. All right, and this is what I always do when I'm trying to add something to a big program and I'm not sure how to do it. I write a little program so I can teach myself what I need to know so I don't screw up my big program much, because I can figure out what it is. Okay, and so here's the idea, is that every character on my keyboard has a Unicode value. We've talked about that before. Okay, and it is true that the little a has a Unicode value that's one less than the little b, which has a Unicode value less than the little c. So notice what happens here. I have a quote here, okay, and I'm going to turn it into an encrypted string. So I'm going to loop through quote.length. Remember, this is a string. We learned in that quote program that we had on how to handle strings. Okay, go get the first character, get the character at location I. So that's going to get the quote I space LOVE. And look what you can do, which is pretty wild, is you can actually take that, add 1 to that value, and turn it back into a character. So that's going to right there, that code right there will turn little a's into little b's into little c's. And then notice I concatenate it onto my encrypted string. So this is the one I'm putting the encrypted string, and I'm going to print out the encrypted string. So if I take this guy and I run it as a Java application, there it is. Looks encrypted to me. That's pretty cool. How would I decrypt? Somebody. Line 10, what would you do in line 10? Subtract 1.
Move the characters.
All right. So if you added 1 to encrypt it, then you subtract 1. Yeah, to decrypt it. That's right. That's exactly right. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Now, what if I had a whole array list of strings, which is what we're going to end up with our program? Test V2. That's the one you want to look at. Because notice what I have here is I've got an array list of strings of the lines that I read in. And I've got an array list of strings that are going to be the encrypted versions of them. And then I think I decrypted here too. Yeah. And then I have an array list of this. Boy, this thing's really close to what you guys want. Really study this one. This is a third array list of strings, which is when I decrypt it and put it back to what it originally was. So in my original one, I add 3 things. I add I love Java, we have fun, baseball is my favorite sport, and I add this one. Those are the original lines. I then encrypt them, and then I decrypt them. So let's go through and run this. We'll see it happens. It's exactly what you want. And then you can just borrow the code. So there's my original lines, 3 of them. I encrypted them line by line. Notice the ones turn into 2s, it turns into 3s. And then I decrypted them. And just like you just said, which is exactly right, when I encrypt, I added 1. And when I decrypted, I subtracted 1. Now you could have a different algorithm, but that's an easiest algorithm. You know, you could turn all your spaces into something else, but I just turned it into whatever happens to be the next Unicode after a space, which happens to be an exclamation point. It's kind of wild. So that gives you how to do those other menu items when you're doing that. So that should help you with how to encrypt the file and write to the console, just what I just did. Okay. And then you got to send those strings out to a text file, read that in and decrypt it. So we just really looked at 3 and 7, and we can work some more on that next week. We will also talk about exception handling a little bit. And I know this is like just a black box that you're just copying and pasting code, and I'm sorry, but in 2 weeks I can't teach you for reading and writing text files in real detail. But believe me, when I read and write text files, I borrow this code too. I mean, that's what I do when I do it myself in my application. So they work. All right. Any questions on that? A lot of stuff there. This is the one, and I'm not saying you shouldn't read the book, but this is the one where you might not even want to read much in the book. We're doing it a little differently than the book is. There's just, the book's overwhelming as far as all the possibilities. And I'm just showing you what I think is the most straightforward way to be successful at doing it. So hopefully that's the case. And in this case, if I were you, I probably wouldn't even watch the PowerPoint movies or watch them after if you have time to do that. Lots of good stuff to learn from it. I just don't want you overwhelmed. Any questions on that?
Can I ask a different question?
You can ask anything you want.
So the project ITP, our final project, the current thing in there, is that current, the stock driver?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure before.
Yeah, before you start that. No, I totally agree. That one's fine. You should have these start files here. And if you notice, let's just look at that real quick because we got a minute here. 1 minute. Oops, that's not it. Stock driver. And stock driver is the one that's going to run. And notice, now we can do menus item 1 and 2. So once you finish mod 7, you can do menus item 1 and 2. And the rest of these comes from previous stuff. And so this, I'm not saying it's going to be fast, but you should have the knowledge to do all of it now once you get used to doing the reading and writing. Good question. Anything else? Nope. All right. You guys have a good rest of the day, and you know I'm here to help. And if you need more hints or anything out in Piazza, let me know, really, seriously, because this stuff isn't easy. Mod 7 stuff is just really hard to absorb sometimes, and we don't have a lot of time to absorb it. So thanks, guys. Have a good one.